All right, guys. Welcome, Base Gardening. As I think is becoming kind of customary, uh, what I did yesterday was I gave the compost pile, the 18-day Berkeley compost test, its first flip after the initial 4 days, and and so what that means is that I'm now on the 2 day cycle. And what I want to do in between, because I'm really interested in just kind of like keeping up with how this goes on every stage. I came out and I touched the side of the container earlier, and it felt like it was fairly warm to me. I mean, it's possible that that can just be the sun coming down and beating on it. It's also I think somebody's had a little accident over there. Um, yep. Uh, so it's possible that it can just be the sun coming down and beating on it and heating the outside of the container up. It's also possible that it's because it's heating up considerably from within. So if you saw my first video that was like this after I set the compost up, when I came back out to see what kind of heat was building the next day, after it had been set up for the first time, it had the most heat on what I would call day one, and I kind of consider setting up the compost pile to be day zero. So I want to see if it's the same thing where it has the most heat that it's going to have after a turn, if you know what I mean. If you get my logic, that I have the most heat after setting it up, and I want to see if it has the most heat after turning it. And from touching the outside, it feels like it possibly does. And so let's get over there and check it out a little bit. Okay, so when I touch the side, I've got a decent amount of heat there. So let's pull this back, see what we get here. All right, unfortunately the heat is there, but it's just not great. So the most heat this thing was ever going to have was maybe that day one. That's pretty disappointing, but you know, it is what it is. I'll continue to flip it. So it can also be the case that it just needs to lose a little bit of water, because yesterday the bottom of it, I noticed that it had gone a little bit anaerobic, and I was down at the bottom. The whole thing wasn't anaerobic, but I noticed it at the bottom, and I was concerned that it had too much water in it, and it had retained too much water, and I was concerned about adding any. And so I decided to put it all back together, and I just added a little bit of water on the top at the end, and maybe I should have added none, because I think I've watched, trying to figure out how to do this composting, I've watched a lot of people's videos about it and all this kind of stuff. And one thing that I picked up from somebody was that it can't get too wet. It's this really funny thing where your compost pile needs to be watered, but then when you make it too wet, you run into a whole nother set of problems that causes. That's when it can go anaerobic, because it's too wet. So you don't want to soak it, but you want to give it water. And so I need to, I think, just let it dry out, just continue turning it and let it dry out some. And then when it finally gets to the point where I think like, oh, okay, I think here's what I think will happen, what I predict will happen, because the bottom always stays wetter than the top, which makes sense when you think about it. This is what I think will happen. I think that the top will get sufficiently dry that I will go, okay, this is ready to receive some water, and that'll be on a turning day. And so what'll happen is I will turn it, and the top will become the bottom, and the inside the outside, and all of that stuff. And I'll have the theoretically anyway, I'll have the wettest part up on the top at that point. And then what I'll be able to do is add just a little bit of water, and as the wet on the top seeps down, and the little bit of water that I added trickles down, hopefully the whole thing will get to the right level of the right level of moisture, the right dampness, because it does need to be slightly damp, but it should not be too wet. So I'm just gonna have to like figure that out. I think that I will definitely go through the next turning without adding any water, and so that turn happens tomorrow, and then it'll be another 2 days after that. And I think that possibly when I get to the the turning after next, which will be in 3 days, I think that's when I have a feeling that's when it might seem kind of dry enough that I can flip it, put a little bit of water only on the top, let that trickle down, and and then maybe it'll all get wet, or maybe it'll work just as well as trickle down economics did. I don't know. Okay, thanks everybody. Base gardening.